Hey everybody, this is Luke Humphrey with Hanson's Coaching Services.com again for you. And we've slowly been working on some kind of core posts about general theory and training philosophy and things like that that really should be essential to any training program. And we've been trying to finally put together some posts for you. And I've been working on this one for a while now, just because as I'm recording this, it's a couple days after the Boston Marathon, and we have, obviously we have quite a few people running that, and so everything kind of gets sidetracked. But hopefully we'll answer some of your questions today and give you some things to think about as you uh, put your training plans together and think about where you want to go with your training goals. So there's really just a few things I essentially want to cover today. One is safely increasing your mileage. There's a lot of talk out there about ways to do it, and I just want to talk to you about kind of some things I've learned about over the last 10 years of coaching and 20 years of running myself. So I want to talk to you about that. Because what it comes down to is how do we safely increase our mileage, but not take, months and years and to get to where we want to be. And I think there's a way we can compromise on a few things and get to where we want to be and still be safe about it. I also want to talk about testing the limits, where you think you can get to as far as mileage, what's appropriate, um, and how to test those limits in hopefully still stay safe, but really just recognizing that there is going to be um, the ultimate, your body will eventually reach a breaking point. Now, you, as a runner, you want to be able to maximize what you can get out of training um, before getting to that breaking point. And then lastly, really running enough to fit your training goals. So we'll talk about some examples with some case studies of athletes that I've coached and athletes that I've witnessed, and really kind of determining, what's enough for you for what you're trying to accomplish, and when is running really going to be the limiting factor for your goal. And what I mean by that is, you're going to get to a point where you simply just can't keep adding mileage. You might have to add things like, strength training and flexibility training and things that we should be doing anyway. But we'll talk about what kind of happens, or we a lot of times runners feel like, well, if I just run more, I'm going to get better, and we ultimately will get to a point where that's not the case, and we can't run anymore until we tackle some other things with our bodies, like being strong enough, fixing muscle imbalances, and maybe even fixing some things with our stride and stuff like that. So really, that's really mostly what I want to talk about as far as increasing mileage goes on here, and then get into some things I've encountered along the way. So my goals for you, I want to touch on this a little bit, just because we're a moderate to high mileage program. There's obviously no doubt about that. You're running 6 days a week in our basic programs. Our marathon programs are 40 to almost 60 miles a week between the beginner and the advanced programs. So you're doing a lot of running anyway. And a lot of times people will come into those programs and really not quite be ready for it. They should be, have probably gone through some base building and just preparing to prepare for the marathon, I guess is a good way to say it. So with that in mind, my goals for you as a runner, I want to get you to be able to handle mileage, but I don't want to get you hurt. I don't want you to take forever, but I don't want you to get hurt again. So it's always finding that balance of doing enough, stressing your current comfort level, but keeping you off the injured list. And then lastly is to recognize that small jumps will lead to big jumps. And so, you know, I'm just thinking about some of the Facebook group posts that we've had recently. Some people they went from the advanced plan, say, for the marathon, and that peaks out about 60 miles a week, depending on a couple of variables. But and they ran well. They ran well off of that advanced program, and then they assume that the next logical step would be just to add more mileage, and I definitely see legitimacy in that thought process, and they made a jump from 60 to 80 mile a week program that we have on our site, and so they end up getting hurt, not reaching their goal, and so that's a big jump. So 60 to 80 is a pretty big jump in mileage, especially going straight from one race to the next race, and so you really never really gave your body time to adapt to a big jump like that, because you automatically threw in a bunch more mileage and then threw in a bunch of more intense work. So you were really kind of asking for an injury, and that's no fault of their own. That's on us as coaches to educate runners with that, with what they should be looking at, and that's obviously one of the reasons why we're doing this video and this podcast. So, but I think to recognize that small jumps, if they would have went from 60 to, being able to average between 65 and 70 the next time out, or being able to average, take some time off and do like an 8 to 10 week training base where they just focused on increasing their mileage, and then did another program at a higher mileage level, or even just staying at that mileage level and doing other things like weight training, focusing on nutrition, stuff like that, where they could have still seen advances in fitness and improvement in time. So there's a lot of things you need to recognize as a runner, and that's on me as a coach to explain, what other avenues you can explore other than just adding the mileage. And now that seems kind of, I know, uh, counterintuitive coming from me, since we're definitely known as more of a high mileage type of program. So, but I think the more I coach and with groups and individuals, the more I see that it's not always about just adding more mileage. And so that's me. That's on me as a coach to try to explain that to all you guys. Okay, so some of that housekeeping out of the way, let's talk about some of the general theory. And if you're seeing this video, you've probably seen I've written a pretty lengthy blog post that I just printed it off. It's fairly lengthy. It's something that it could definitely be into a third edition of the Hanson's Marathon Method. But don't get too excited, because the second edition is just out. So, but that's the beauty of a book. It's you're always thinking about things to add, and there's always a second or third edition. As long as people as long as people buy the first and second editions, then there can be a third edition. But it seems like you guys are picking up copies of that second edition, so I thank you with that. But anyway, I want to talk about general theory, and this is accompanying, like I said, a blog post that I've written. So I'm going to read a little bit from that. But you really have the 10% rule, which, if you're not familiar with that, is um, really just increasing your mileage no more than 10% per week. And that's, so let me read from you. So this is it's certainly a pretty conservative approach, especially for newbies. So let's say you're running 10 miles a week. That's saying you're going to add 1 mile the next week, and then 1.1 mile the next week, and then 1.2 miles the next week. So it's very, very conservative, and you can see that to get to 20 miles a week, it's going to take you a pretty long time to get to that point. And you don't necessarily have to do that. It's very conservative, and I understand being conservative for sure, because as I said, my goal for you is just get you more fit, but not get you hurt as well. So, but the thing is, how practical is that 1 mile increase? And it might be. I mean, you might just add a mile to a run or something like that. But you're at that point, you're not adding overall very much to your week, and so I feel like you can, early on, you can actually probably increase a little bit more than 10%. You might even be able to bump that up to maybe like 20% a week, or something to that effect. And we'll talk about this a little bit more in a little bit, but then you're always increasing your mileage. You're never really settling into something and adjusting to it. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But so for me personally, the 10% rule is something that I probably don't follow very much, regardless of athlete. To me, it just seems, I don't like the fact that you're always increasing. And not to say you have to, but to get to where you want to be in terms of mileage, you're going to have to add just a little tiny bit every week to get to where you want. To me, that can take a long time, and I like the idea of more settling into a mileage, adjusting to that mileage, and then making another jump. And I'll talk about that in a second. But so that's basically the 10% rule. Another theory comes from Daniel's running formula, which many of you are familiar with. And Dr. Daniels writes about his theory is adding basically adding 1 mile per run that you do a week. So if you run 5 times a week, you can add 5 miles to your week of volume. So regardless if you're at 10, 20 miles, 30 miles, 40 miles a week, if you run 5 times a week, you can add 5 miles at a time to that. And so that's that basic theory. Now, it's definitely scalable. I'm reading a little bit from the blog I wrote, but um, competitive runners will have there's times when I'm running 14 times a week, twice a day, every day, and so that would mean adding 14 miles, which ultimately at the mileage level I was at wouldn't be more than 10 to 15% of my weekly volume. So you can see how these can kind of overlap a little bit too. It just depends on where you're at. However, if you're a lower mileage person, this is a 15 to 20% increase. And I was trying to find out, and I couldn't really see it anywhere, was whether or not you did this every week. And I couldn't really tell from what he was writing what he was getting at. It came across as adding every week, but then he also says in this, it goes into the general theory that I like, is that you adjust to a mileage level you adjust, and really any training stress, you adjust to it after staying at that stress level for 4 to 6 weeks. So, it came across as that you could add um, every a mile per run every week. So essentially, you could run 5 miles. If you ran 5 times a week, you could add 5 miles a week up until whenever you felt you were at your peak mileage. And I guess ultimately at the lower end of the mileage scale, you probably could do that, because if you're 10 miles a week, you're probably not going to get higher than 30, 40 miles a week, which if you're starting from scratch and going to try to run a marathon, that seems like where the general population would be at, as far as starting really essentially from just starting to run up to um, a number of mileage that they could probably handle and still cover the marathon distance. And at that, I would assume that they would just stay at that level. So they would just build by running, maybe 3 times a week and then 4 times a week, and using that scalability of the formula to add mileage to the week. So you can see it would only take like 6, 8 weeks to get up to 30, 40 miles a week. And then they would probably just stay there for 10, 12 weeks. So I can definitely see the scalability of that formula that he uses. Um, and ultimately, the more mileage you run, the closer that becomes to a 10% rule. Now, however, people will ask me, like, what do I think is the best approach? And so, obviously, I think like lower mileage you can scale a little bit higher. I think you can go above that 10%. Um, I just don't like adding mileage every week. What I would do is more of a bulk type of addition to mileage. Is I would basically say, if you're at 10 miles a week, I would stay there for like 4 weeks, and then after 4 weeks, then I would add maybe 5 miles, stay there for 4 weeks, add 10 miles, or something to that effect. So it doesn't have to necessarily be an addition every week. It can be a bigger bulk of mileage at one time, and then you just stay there for a few weeks and let your body adjust to it. And I think that ultimately, when I'm looking at this, it's really kind of a mix between the super conservativeness of the Daniels rule, and then adding on to basically what Daniels number of runs per week rule. We're just giving our body time to adjust to that. So it might even be more than the number of runs per week. So ideally, if you're running with me, you're running at least 5 times a week. So I would say if you go 10, you could almost double that, but you can't go from 20 to 40. You might go 20 to 30, and then 30 to 35, and then 35 to 40 over a course of 8, 10 weeks. But that's really my general rule, and that just is just mileage that we're talking about. That's not anything else. So, but those are the two main theories, and then just kind of my take on those theories. Okay, so I'm not going to tell you what is the best way, because I think obviously in something like this, it's really going to it's really going to depend on the person. But I did write some things that I would consider if I were you and I were writing out your training plan. So the first thing is I would say is maximize your current level. So what I mean by that is your current mileage level, your current workout level. If you are at a level where you don't feel quite comfortable yet, I would get to the point where you are comfortable at that, and then adjust again. Um, I think a lot of times we want to move up quickly, but we don't want to move up too quickly that we never completely adjust to a new training volume. And as I said, it takes 4 to 6 weeks for the body to adjust to a new training stress. You don't want to jump to another training stress until you've gained what you can out of your current training stress. And by that, I'm talking about cardiovascular benefit, but I'm also talking about bone, tendon, structural types of things. Because what will happen a lot of times is runners will just jump, 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 jump in mileage, and they feel great early on, but after a couple weeks, let's say 4 or 6 weeks, I see this a lot in our program. They'll start out and they'll be running 20, 30 miles a week, and then they feel really good, so they'll push the runs. They'll try to add more to the runs, and they really try to take themselves to a fitness point higher than they need to be, especially that early in the training segment. And they ultimately get hurt because they're trying to do too much on a level they're not quite ready for. So if you give yourself time to completely adjust to a training level and then make a jump, you're going to keep yourself a lot less risk for injury. And if you can run 30 miles a week, maximize those benefits at 30 miles a week before you add another training stress. It just, to me, it means like if I can run 30 and be fast, then why would I run 40 and be overtrained when I'm not ready for it? And I'm not saying don't go up to 40. I'm just saying make sure that you're ready to run that next level of training before you make that jump. Second thing I would say is definitely focus on endurance before intensity. So, again, I go back to our marathon programs, and this goes into play before, whatever you're training for. If you're training for a 5K, 10K half, whatever, focus on the endurance before the intensity. So what I would say is, uh, like I said, 4 to 6 weeks to a level, but also endurance is going to improve faster than structural things. So you want to make sure you're focusing on that. And really, the one thing I will say with mileage is people tend to get hurt off doing too much fast work compared to like easy running, long runs, things like that. They'll get hurt. They'll get hurt more doing speed work and in hard workouts than they will just running mileage. So a lot of people say, I can't run mileage, I just get hurt. And some people it's true, like structurally they're just not built to handle it. But for the majority of people I've worked with and I've seen use the method, their problem tends to be just that they want to do everything at once. And so I would say focus on endurance first, where it doesn't matter how fast you're running, you're still going to get the benefit, you're still going to get more fit from building that endurance. And then once that endurance is ready, then you can add the intensity. And that's a way that you can really take yourself to a new level and not get hurt. Because ultimately, it might seem like a long period of time to get yourself from where you're at now to where you want to be. However, if you keep trying to force the issue with doing everything at once and you keep getting hurt and then you get set back 2 weeks, you get set, and it's like 2 steps forward, 1 step back continually. So what might take you, 12 weeks to get ready for, if you push and try to do everything at once, it could take, 20 weeks, 24, you could always be stuck in a rut, in a cycle of trying to push too much before you're ready, getting hurt, getting set back, and then always continually making a comeback. So, I've just seen that time and time again. Third thing, cross training. I get a lot of flack on cross training simply because, I've said, I believe in if you want to run fast, you got to run fast, and then people jumped down my throat and said, I've run this, this, and this, and I used cross training. That is 100% great for you, but I just think ultimately you get to a point where if you want to be at a certain level, you've got to run a certain amount, and people will try to replace especially easy runs with cross training. And I always have to continually preach about what the benefits of an easy run are. And you don't get some of those same benefits with non-weight bearing cross training. So um, to me, it's a point of transition, not replacement. And what I mean by that is, if you're running 3 days a week right now and I want you to get to 5 days a week, Obviously, I want you exercising on other days of the week. But what we need to do as a coach and an athlete is we need to start backing off one of those replacing one of those cross training days with a running day. And ultimately, right there, you're increasing your mileage, right? So we stay at that level for a while. We take another cross training day out, put it with a short, easy run, boom, and then we're at the 5 days a week. And then we can build from there. Then we can either add more easy mileage, or we can start adding a little bit more intensity and gradually scaling the intensity up. So I just feel like, again, like I said with the endurance before intensity, I just feel like a lot of times when people are saying they can't run mileage, it's because they've tried to do too much too fast. And when they give themselves a chance to adapt to a new mileage level before adding another training stress, then you can start setting yourself up for success instead of a failure. Um, One thing I didn't mention on that, so on the endurance before intensity. So this all kind of ties together too. We use an acronym in health fitness, FIT, FITT, and this represents frequency of exercise, intensity of exercise, amount of time exercising, and type of exercise. So when we begin increasing mileage, we're potentially adjusting all four of these, right? So we could be increasing the frequency, we could be increasing the intensity, we could increase the time on a run, and the type obviously is going to stay the same. But if you try to adjust all four of those, something has to give. And so if we're adding the mileage, we're already adding frequency more than likely, and we're already adding the time spent. So the only thing left is the intensity, and that's what we can control. So we really want to make sure that we're not scaling all of those variables up at the same time. And that's ultimately when you see people get hurt, is when they try to run too much, too soon, too fast, and it gets them in trouble. And it doesn't even have to be adding like a workout to that regimen. It could be just simply running your easy days too fast because you feel good, you're fresh, and then all of a sudden you're pushing your easy days 30 seconds a mile faster than they should be. You start doing it every day, and you feel good for 3, 4 weeks, and then all of a sudden, boom, you got tendonitis, shin splints, something's blown out because it definitely takes time for your body to adjust. Okay. Okay, so here we go. Points continued, second page here. A question I get is, do I add current runs or do I add days to my week? And this is a question I do get this a lot. My basic thought is that you really want to run 30 minutes at length. So if your current runs are not at 30 minutes, get them to 30 minutes. Once they're at 30 minutes, then I kind of go back to what I just talked about, where if you're following our program, I would really like to see you running 5 days a week. So then I would say add another day. Um, get yourself to a fourth day, and then stay at that level for a while, and then add the fifth day. And then from there, and then you can start adding to the current runs again, or you can start adding intensity, whatever the case situation. And that's when you should be, if you have a coach or you're with us, that's what we should be discussing at that time. Are you at a point where we can start adding intensity, or do we need to keep adding volume by adding to the runs after we get to 5 days a week of running? Or do we add a 6 day of running? And that's where I think you have to be in consultation with somebody. Obviously it doesn't have to be us, but I think if you're using a coach, that's a discussion you should have. And obviously that's why I think getting a coach, even just getting a coach for 3, 4 months to learn some things and get you to a point where you can start making some of these decisions, with a background of what you should be doing, is a good thing. But that's generally, so get your runs to 30 minutes and then get to the number of days you want to week. I'm sorry, run 30 minutes, get your runs to at least 30 minutes, then get your weekly volume up by getting to the number of days you want to run per week. So ideally you're running 5 days a week or more. And then you can make an adjustment if you add more days or do you add volume to runs. And at that point you might be able to add enough total mileage for the week that you might be able to add to one run and then add another run to the week. So you might be able to get up to 6 days a week, and one of those runs being a little bit longer than other ones. But that's how I would handle it. So I envision that taking like an 8 to 10 week period. And honestly, obviously, these are for people who are at a level and want to get to a new level. This isn't necessarily for a veteran runner who is just coming back from downtime going into the next training segment. That's something we'll discuss a little bit later. And lastly on these, I really, we talked about this a lot, and I don't even know if I needed to make it its own thing, but I can't stress it enough, is that you have to give yourself enough time at each level. So give yourself a few weeks at each training level before you make that next jump. Let your body adjust to it, let it maximize the benefits that you can get out of that level, and then take the next step. Because if you keep taking steps before you're quite ready to do it, you're ultimately going to end up getting hurt, and you're going to get sick or injured. You're going to get a setback, and then you're going to be, like I said, it's going to be 2 steps forward and 1 step back, and it's going to take you much, much longer in the long term to get to where you want than it would be is if you just slowed down at first, built it the right way, and then got into your main training. So I can't stress that enough, and I think that's something that most people make the mistake because they just feel so good in the early stages, and they get pretty excited, and then it just kind of falls apart on them a month or two down the road. So again, I can't stress that enough. So from here, we'll move on to some other things, especially for non-beginners, and we'll talk about how to help you folks out. One of the big situations we have is not a lot of guidance as far as when we're coming back from a downtime. And what I'm talking about here is a planned downtime. So, like recording this is the week after the Boston Marathon, all my athletes automatically put on a downtime, kind of a mandatory downtime. For most of them, it's going to be at least 10 to 14 days. But if they're really beat up, then we extend that downtime. Not all that is completely off of doing anything. Definitely for beginners, I really don't have them do much at all. But the more experienced the athlete is, the more I'll give them as far as take a few days off completely, and then you can start adding some things like core and strength training and some cross training in there. But there's no running for 10 to 14 days. And so how do we come back from that? What's a safe way to really make sure that we're completely recovered from the training segment and still able to get back to training at a reasonably amount of time? We don't want to take another 3 months to get before we can start doing workouts again or something like that. We want to make sure we can move forward, but not put ourselves in a position to be set back from an injury just because we didn't give ourselves enough time to heal up. We're not going to talk about injury and illness because I think we've talked about that in other places, and I think that there's a whole video out there in blog posts about that, so we can leave that for that. But I think for here we'll just talk about when you're healthy and coming back from a big race and in between segments and things like that. So there's a couple different ways to approach. The first one is, say you've run really probably a 5K up to a half marathon. I'll give 5 to 7, maybe for a half marathon it might be 7 to 10 days off. So you'll have a little bit of gray area in that 7 to 10 day range for some folks, and you can kind of just merge what works best for you. But here's pretty much what I would do for my athletes. So coming from 5 to 7 days off, so about a week off. First week I'd give them about 50 to 60% of their peak mileage, and I would just spread it over several days. So they're not going to have a ton of running in one run. It's going to be pretty short mileage spread across the week. So there's nothing that's too stressful on one single day. And of course, all this is going to be easy mileage, nothing on any intensity at all. Second week, we'll bump that percentage up. We'll go 70 to 80% of the peak mileage, and again, we'll keep it easy. And maybe instead of having 2 days off, we'll just go down to 1 day off and potentially a longer run. Third week, we'll go to about 90% of peak goal mileage with a long run and one light workout. So usually I'll do like a progression run, or we call it a cut down. So we'll start out at like a minute slower than marathon pace and work down from there. And this first one, I typically don't even get down to marathon pace. And I'll do that whether they run a 5K or 10K. So it might be a hypothetical pace for this person, but I usually do that, and then after that we'll move on from there. So that fourth week we'll start adding maybe a light track workout just to kind of do get some leg turnover, and 400s are an easy workout to give somebody because you can run It's a short intensity workout, and it's really almost a glorified stride. We just make them fairly light, really just get the legs turning over faster than what they had been, and then we'll do a long run as well. And we'll keep it right around that 90%. And it might depend on what they're training for too. We might keep it at 80%, because if there's somebody's training for a marathon and they were at their highest mileage ever, we might back it down to like 80, keep it at 80 to 90% of that, and hopefully that's kind of their new baseline for training mileage. And but it really depends on the individual. But ultimately, that goal is by the fifth week to be at normal training at pretty much where you're going to be at for mileage. So really no workouts for 2 weeks. Third week is a very light workout, and then the fourth week is another light workout but a different type and a long run, and then by the fifth week you can just get right back into it. So I feel like that's a good blend of taking time off and then coming back into running. You're obviously different from if you're coming back from an injury standpoint, because now you've got to make sure you're healthy. And we do here too, but ideally, you made it through the race okay, and it's really more just of a regenerative reason that we're taking the time off more than recovering from an injury. So that's how I would handle that. And again, this would be more like 5K, 10K, maybe half marathon, depending on the level of the athlete. Okay, so then you have the 10 to 14 days off, and this is what you typically see for half marathon to marathon, depending on the person. So again, first week, you're going to see a little bit more conservative approach to this, just because we talked about this in other study or in other writings that we did in videos. You can see damage from the marathon up to 4 weeks after the marathon. So we really have to be careful here. So cardiovascular, you might feel okay. But muscular, you've done a lot of damage to your muscles, and you've depleted. You've really taken yourself to that brink of being completely depleted. So we've got to be careful when we're coming back. So 10 to 14 days off, and I guess you preference this so. A true beginner, they might not do anything in that 10 to 14 days. I used to say complete rest for pretty much everybody, but honestly, I feel like doing some light cross training as far as like biking, going for walks, things like that, that's low impact, get your legs moving, that can actually improve healing. You just don't want to do anything, you don't want to be running. It's got to not be running, and it's got to not be hard on the weight, hard weight bearing type of activity. So something like elliptical, anything like that might be a good cross training activity. Let your body regenerate from the running, recover from the damage you did from the endurance part of the race, and then you can move forward. So in this case, take 10 to 14 days off. First week would be I usually do 30 to 45 minutes of easy running every other day. Um, Depending on it really depends on what their mileage was during the training. So lower mileage people will be 30 minutes a day. Higher mileage will be about 45 minutes a day, every other day. Second week, we'll bump that up 45 to 60 minutes, and again, depending on what their level of training during the previous training cycle was. And so we'll still give them a couple days off in there. Third week, we'll still focus only on easy mileage. We'll do 60 to 70% of the average mileage, including one longer run. So it might be like an 8 to 10 mile run in there. Fourth week, 5 to 7 days of easy running again, totaling about 80%. So we'll ratchet that volume up again. So notice here, we're focusing on endurance before intensity. And we'll do either light 400s on the track, or we'll do a cut down followed by a weekend longer run. And I might not even give them a workout. I might just do a longer run. It really depends on how they're feeling when they're coming back. But again, it's something really light and a little bit of a longer run. Fifth week, same as the fourth week, just alternating. So if the first week I gave them 400s, the fifth week I will give them the cut down, or vice versa. And then volume is again a little bit higher, so we're 80 to 90% total volume. And then sixth week, then they begin training for the next training segment. So a lot of times I'll try to get that person into a shorter race segment the next time out. So if they came off a marathon, I'll try to get them into like a 5K, 10K segment, or a 10K half marathon segment, and we can shorten up the time of training that they need for that. But sometimes I want to jump right into another marathon, and then we can do that too. And then you probably can shorten down that next marathon training segment because you've already just come off a marathon segment. So we don't need to repeat a lot of the stuff or some of the stuff that we've already done. We can shorten that up. So maybe from 18 weeks we can go down to 12 weeks, and then you're still on that 18-week cycle as it may be. So hopefully that makes sense. But that's how we would approach for half marathon to marathon, and that seems to have worked pretty well. Obviously, when I'm coaching individuals, this might change a little bit, but I think for general use, this has been pretty good for us. Okay, so now I kind of want to flip the script a little bit. And so we've been talking about adding mileage and how to get to where, how we can maximize that. But now I really want to talk about like how much mileage is enough, because I see a lot of times we a lot of times we'll skip supplemental things like flexibility and dynamic warm-ups and strides and strength training, all because we feel like if we can get a couple more miles in, that's going to ultimately be our source of improvement. And for a lot of times it is, because you start out at low mileage. If you just run more, you're going to get more fit. I've taken people that have big PRs in marathons just because they were running 30 miles a week. I got them to be able to run 50 miles a week, and they PR'd by 30 minutes. It wasn't anything special. I just got them to be able to tolerate more mileage. But eventually, those people are going to get to a point where, like, do they want to go from 50 to 70 miles a week? Maybe, maybe not. Depends on the person. So, in order for them to improve, they first have to maximize what they're going to get out of 50 miles a week. And that includes then thinking about, okay, what am I going to do for strength training? Am I focusing on improving muscle imbalances? And I'm looking at my form. Is my nutrition good? All those other little things come into play. And that's kind of what I want to talk about. Like, the answer, as much as I love mileage, the answer isn't always going to be just adding more mileage. I think, I'll tell you a tale of two locals here, but eventually we do get to the point of diminishing returns where adding mileage is actually probably going to be more of a detriment than a benefit. And so I really want to just kind of read through a couple of case studies that I have written about, just because I've observed these people. One I coach, one I do not coach, and I've just kind of seen some different things, but I've seen both of them run for years now. So the first is Dave. He came to me early in his early 40s. He ran high school, but had run decades. Now his kids are running, and he wanted to get involved. And so he essentially just followed the basic plan we had at the running store, and ran his first marathon and did okay. Ran right around 3 hours, a little bit north of 3 hours. Now, when I started coaching him, he's the advanced plan peaks out at about 60 miles a week, depending on some warm up and cool down stuff. But we gradually increased his mileage from there up to about 75, and now he's running 240 to 245. I know his goal is to ultimately break 240 in the marathon. And the thing with Dave is, I know he travels for business a lot. He'll be gone for a week in China. He'll be gone a week overseas to Europe. And so it's hard for him to be super consistent in training. So what we found is 70, 75 miles a week is really about maxed out for him. For him to get any more, it's more stress for him just thinking about how he's going to get it in than anything. And ultimately, with his work schedule and things like that, it's probably past the point of no return. He's probably going to actually do more damage than good trying to increase that mileage. So what we need to do with him is we need to focus on the little things I just talked about, like doing strides, doing event. I know he needs work on core strength. We need to work on fixing some form issues, and things like that. But that's where he's ultimately going to keep seeing improvement, is working on those little details, which is going to make him a better runner. Running 80, 85 miles a week at this point in his life isn't going to make him a better runner. So that's where we need to back off. And I totally think he can reach those goals, but we have to take charge of those little details in his life. The running part, the big part of it is fine. He's perfect where he is. Now we've got to take care of some of the details. So for him, it doesn't make sense to move any higher on the mileage scale. Now, the opposite kind of side of that I see is a local runner. I don't coach, but I've seen him run for a long time, and I know he runs a lot of mileage, 100-mile weeks, pretty regularly. A little bit older than Dave, but they're about the same level as far as time-wise. And I've seen, because we do local speed workouts and strength workouts and things like that during the summer, and I've seen him run a number of times, and it's just look at him and I see so much to where he could improve. But I know he doesn't do these things. I know he doesn't do the core. He doesn't do the strides, and if he does do them, he's not very consistent at them. And I see him, he's hunched over because he's so weak in the core. He needs to open up his rib cage, do some flexibility and stretching, and he needs to be consistent at it. And so for him, I don't feel like, you know, Dave's running 75 miles a week, he's running 100 miles a week, and they're running the same times. I feel like if he came down from 100 and ran 85 miles a week, and then incorporated these other aspects of training on a regular basis, I think he would break through a plateau, and I think he would improve and at least feel better. I don't. I just it's honestly painful to watch this person run at times, and it's trying not to be a knock on him. It's really kind of like, if I were him, I would be like pumped, because it would mean I wouldn't have to run as much if I just incorporated these other things, and I could probably see improvement. To me that's that's exciting. That's what I look for in myself when I'm at the things when I'm at a plateau. It's like, okay, well, if I just switch this and this and around, it's like, it's not necessarily to keep running more mileage. Trust me, you're talking to a guy who's run 150 miles a week in the past, and looking back at it now as I'm on the other side of my career, what would have happened if I would have backed that down to 120 and focused more on the other aspects of training? Maybe I even preserve my career and make it last a little bit longer. So you have to take stock of the whole picture, and really see like what things am I missing, keeping balance in my training, keeping me, muscles loose. Is my form falling apart? All those things we have to take a look at. And so it's just not the mileage thing. So, and that's really how we continue to improve, is focusing on some more of those details. And what it struggles with as a coach is, okay, if I get a person to run, especially let's say I get a person who comes on and they want to run the beginner Hanson program. A lot of those times that's the most mileage they've ever run in their life. So for me to ask them to run the mileage and do these other things, I know that's not going to happen. So I'm going to sound contradictory here, but for them, the most bang for their buck is going to come from the mileage. But then when you reach that point where the mileage is no longer going to be that big bang for the buck, then you got to find out what else can I do. And ideally, as a coach, I guess what I would say is, where is it chicken or egg? Do we ultimately? I feel like we should just focus on if I can get a person to just run 20, 30 miles a week and show them how to do these things, it might even make it easier to transition up to 30, 40, 50, 60 miles a week. And so that's one thing that I've always struggled with as a coach. Like, what do you introduce first? But then I think it comes down to, what am I going to be able to get this person to do? And a lot of times the only thing you're going to be able to get them to do is run. So that's why things kind of don't always match up with what I'm saying with what's on the schedule, because ultimately I have to look at what are the best chances I'm getting of somebody to do something. And most of the time it's just going to be able to get them run. And so you have to pick your battles as a coach. Like, okay, I know you're going to do this. I know you won't do this. I'll tell you about it. And if you think you want to do it, then I'll show you. And that's kind of where I get to be as a coach. So, um, talk about something next here. Some general guidelines. So this gives you an idea of, really about like where you are to where you want to be. And so you can see the difference here just in the mileage. So like, and this is in the book, and we've shown this chart before, but a 5K, to be a beginner, even 10 to 20 maybe for a true beginner 5K runner. But if you want to be competitive, you're probably going to have to be in that 40 to 50 mile range. So one thing I would look at that is, if sometimes you'll see somebody who can run less mileage and still be in the competitive, they're just that talented. But for most people, they're not that talented, and they're going to have to run that mileage. The other way to look at that is, if you're running 75 miles a week and you're not running times that are comparative to where you should be, then maybe you're running too much, and maybe that's a sign to back off. And you could still run the same times you are running off of less mileage, and then you can also do more supplemental things. So that's really just kind of an idea of where you're at compared to what your times are. And then it can be a motivator to say, okay, for me to be competitive, I need to get up to this kind of mileage. Or it can be like, okay, I'm running 100 miles a week, but I'm running a 3-hour marathon. Is that conducive? Or am I going to be better off backing it down to 80 miles a week and getting stronger, and getting more lean, whatever the case is. And what you might find too is, once you do that and you get stronger, you work on your stride, you work on some overall speed, things like that, you might be able to do that off 80 miles a week, run 3 hours, and then take a step up to 90 to 100 miles a week, and maybe you run 250 now. So that's what I talk about too when you're maximizing where you're at a certain level. Did you jump ahead too soon? Did you not maximize what you could at a level before making another big jump. And so we have to be careful with that. So, but I think that's a good chart to see, like just to compare where you're at to where your times represent you. So, I think yeah, one last chart here. So simplify. What I have is just what obviously what I just showed you was this very simplified way to look at increasing mileage, but it's a good general idea, and it's a good kind of what we do with people to give you an idea of where we're at when we coach somebody. The important thing to take away is to increase mileage safely and at a reasonable rate. You can do both. You can push the envelope a little bit, but you have to know when to back off too. Take care of the details just besides just logging the miles we just talked about, and then know what you really need to run what you want. Okay, so I know that's okay. Know what you really need to run, what you want, and when it goes back to like if you're running 20 miles a week, but you want to run a 15-minute 5K, that probably just isn't going to happen. And the other way around too is if you're running 75 miles a week and you're running, a 20-minute 5K, you might even be able to back off and save yourself some heartache there. So just a quick way to look at it, but hopefully that helps you out a little bit. Um, Find us on our HCS main page on Facebook, Hanson's Coaching Services. You can just search for that, find us. You can also find our closed Facebook page. All you have to do is um, ask for an invite, and unless you're a spam artist, we will approve you. But you can just search for Hanson's Coaching Community page and be on there. And as always, you can find us at hansonscoachingservices.com. You can sign up for our email list if you want to avoid the social media activity feeds, which I don't blame you. And we'll put some more content on there. We'll put this on there. We'll blast this out to our email list and our social pages, be on YouTube, and we'll put it in our resource pages for our coached athletes. So with that, I thank you, and hopefully you can use this a little bit. All right, take care.